All right. That's great. So, I'm not used to podiums. I usually walk around, but I'll try to make this work here. So what I wanted to talk about today was to give you an overview of what I do at NOLS and kind of give you a sense of the risk management program at NOLS, how we're set up organizationally to deal with risk. Talk a little bit about organizational and systems risk management, which hopefully will have some relevance to your work world, and talk about incident review process. How many have heard of NOLS? How many are NOLS grads? Anybody a NOLS grad? Okay, so a few of you. So let me give you, the rest of you, a little bit of background about what we do, who we are. It's the National Outdoor Leadership School. We were founded in 1965, and we're headquartered in Lander, Wyoming. And a guy named Paul Petzold started the school. He wanted to train outdoor people to lead others in the outdoors. He had been involved with Outward Bound. In fact, actually what he was trying to do was start an Outward Bound school, an Outward Bound leadership school in Lander, but the Outward Bound hierarchy or bureaucracy said, no, we got something else in mind. And so he went off and did it himself. And so we've expanded since then. We do a lot of different activities, mainly a lot of hiking and backpacking, but we do quite a bit of mountaineering, glacial and rock mountaineering, rock climbing. We do a lot in the winter. We also do horse packing. We spend a lot of time on water and sea kayaking, different kinds of river expeditions, and sailing. And most everything that we do is an expedition. And that is, it's going to be multiple nights out. Most of our trips, most of our courses are more than 10 days long. The bulk of them are probably 30 days long. And then we also have semesters that range from 75 to 90 days long. We also have a Wilderness Medicine Institute, and they train people in wilderness medicine, so wilderness first responder, wilderness EMT, and those kinds of things. A sense of scope for how big we are and the extent of our operations. Last year we had 4,200 students on expeditions around the world, and we had 672 individual instructors. So that's a lot of human resources to manage in some high-risk environments. The NOLS Wilderness Medicine Institute taught over 14,000 students last year. And we also put on a conference every year called the Wilderness Risk Management Conference. Last year it was in Portland, Oregon, and we had 470 attendees with that. We do that conference in conjunction with Outward Bound and SCA. And this year it's the 20th anniversary of the Wilderness Risk Management Conference, and it's going to be down in Jackson Lake Lodge in Grand Teton Park in early October. We operate in 15 different states in the U.S., mostly in the West, except for New York. A couple of years ago, we opened up a small program in the Adirondacks for younger kids, 14 and 15-year-olds. We're in 11 different countries around the world. So it's a pretty expansive program. We deal with a lot of different sort of risks, and we deal with a lot of different entities within these countries and states, and how we manage risk and how we set up our emergency response systems. Since I'm going to talk about organizational risk management, I need to give you a little bit of sense of what NOLS is set up like organizationally. Our headquarters is in Lander, Wyoming. That's our international headquarters. And then we have these branch schools that are at the different locations. So we've got them in, say, Arizona, Wyoming, Idaho, Washington, the Yukon, Alaska. And from the branches, that's where the courses go out. And so the headquarters supports the branches. Much of our larger functions are centralized. So our admissions and marketing is centralized out of Lander, out of our headquarters. The branches don't have to market their own courses. That's all done here. Our staffing for field instructors and all our HR, human resources, is done out of Lander. Finance, information systems, we have a pretty robust network, computer network that connects all of our schools worldwide into one database, access through the internet. We have an operations manager, and then that's where I live, as well as in Lander at headquarters. So on the branch side, they're in charge of the program management. So they decide where to go, how to get there, what the best route is. They do the risk assessments for the particular routes. They set up the emergency procedures if somebody has a problem. They do the faculty supervision, so when you come off a course as an instructor, you get evaluated, you get debriefed. They provide that kind of feedback. They also deal with the land use planning, or land use permitting, that kind of thing. And then the instructors are running the course, so they deliver the curriculum. They take care of the student management, whether it's high-performing students, low-performing students, people that get sick and hurt. They're responsible for the course outcomes. So we're organized, our risk management program, and I use the term program rather than plan because it's not so much a plan. Risk management at NOLS is throughout the organization, and we're kind of organized in 5 different ways. So we provide oversight, and that's from the executive director to the senior director team, me, other directors, these branch school directors, all the way down to the instructors in the field and the students in the field. Everyone in the organization has some responsibility for managing risk, even our students. And we make it clear to our students ahead of time that that's part of the deal. We have a lot of administrative processes. We have a core curriculum that is leadership, environmental studies, outdoor skills, and risk management. And so 4 key components, all of which in my mind are really bolstering and backing up the risk management part. We have extensive field support services, so transportation systems, getting people to and from the mountains, feeding them with good food, and giving them good gear. And then we have a pretty elaborate instructor training program. Every instructor has to take an instructor's course. Most of those are 34 days long. Then you work a course as an instructor, as like an apprentice instructor, before you can get certified. And then we have a pretty elaborate continuing education program. So instructors can either expand their knowledge into different areas or enlarge their knowledge within a particular area. And so that works out pretty well. So one of risk management at NOLS is defined in kind of in 2 parts. One is this overall part, which is basically saying that NOLS supports educational experiences by integrating all aspects of the organization to promote the health and well-being of students and staff. So back to this chart, basically risk management is a theme throughout. And it's been this way since almost day one. Paul Petzold started it. He had this as a priority. It's developed as part of our culture as we've grown in almost 50 years. The other part of the risk management definition is what I use for our field side. And so risk management is a process. And I think this is relevant to what we're going to talk about today. It's a process, so you're always learning, you're always figuring things out, you're always learning new things, and you're trying to understand and anticipate the risks. And so incident analysis helps us get a better understanding of what the risks are and anticipating them, and then being able to apply appropriate responses. So a response to a risk in one incident there might be some good things out of it and some not so good things out of it. And through incident analysis, we can do a better job of figuring out what's appropriate and what's not. So it's a very dynamic kind of definition of risk management. So on a priority level, our first priority for risk management is to protect our students and staff. This is the why. You have to have a good why, otherwise risk management rings hollow. If your why is to comply with regulations, well, the workers, the people in the company, aren't going to be as motivated to do it. But if you have a good why, like here's why we're doing it. We're an educational organization. We want to provide a great education to our students. That's the reason we do this. And that's why we design our risk management program to achieve that goal. The second one, if we do this well, this will happen. We'll protect our business from liability. Okay? And it's worked well so far. We're still here after 50 years. We've had some major events in our history. We're resilient enough to be able to withstand those and keep going forward. So it works quite well for us. Our first priority in risk management is not to cover our butts. It's to do a good job. So now I'll jump into my incident data program. And a big part of my job is to manage our incident reporting system. We've been doing this for 28 years. My predecessor in this position, Todd Schimmelfennig, started this. Actually, we've got data that goes back 30 years, but our current database only goes back to 28 years. And in that period, we've had 3,700,000 program days. Excuse me. Program day is one person on a course for one day. So if you got 10 people, one day is 10 program days. It's really important to know what the program days are because you need to be able to calculate your incidents by rates. During this period, we've had 9,700 medical incidents. So those are injuries or illnesses. And we have established criteria for what is a reportable injury and what is a reportable illness. Some organizations that I've been involved with, they'll report every Band-Aid, cut, and splinter, and that to me gets a little noisy. And we've sort of set some bars for our threshold of what's reportable. It needs to have more than simple first aid. Might result in a lost day. Somebody has to sit out. It might result in an evacuation. So during this 28 years, we've had 4,000 evacuations. That sounds ominous, but most of these evacuations are for minor injuries, and they're fairly simple evacuations where they rode out on a horse or they met a vehicle at a roadhead, that kind of thing. Probably in that time we've had, I just guess maybe 100 really serious evacuations where helicopters had to come in and take care of people in kind of life and limb situations. And we've had over 2,000 near misses. And our near miss data is going up. But the reason it's going up is because people are more comfortable reporting them. Early in this period of 28 years, people were hesitant to report near misses. They were afraid of retribution. They were afraid of punitive actions against them. They might get fired if they admitted they had a problem or had a mistake. And we've worked really hard over time to try to break that attitude. So we actually recognize and kind of reward, if you will, people who admit or report these near misses. That's more important to us.
Jim, what's your definition of a near miss?
Well, we have a lot of them. We have many different definitions for different activities. So some examples would be rock fall that lands within 5 meters, a fall off a horse. We have a variety of near-miss definitions for canoe, kayak, and raft, broaches, pins, and capsizes. What we try to weed out is not, since we're educational, people are going to tip over in their boat, right? People are going to fall down, that kind of thing. So we don't want to count every little detail. We want to get the ones that have a little more significance. So we've come up with these different definitions. And there's, like I said, there's many of them. The one, to me, it's the oh shit factor. It's like, oh my God, that happened and no one got hurt. I can't believe it. Something like that happens, we're all paying attention. We're all ears. We're really dialed into it. So collecting data over time gives us the ability to look for long-term trends in what's going on in our program. So going back, these are medical incident rates per 1,000 program days. Per 1,000 program days is kind of the standard and at least in our world, denominator. And you can see that the number of injuries and illnesses, the rate, goes up and down, and it fluctuates. And it's less concerning to me. The evacuation rate, those people that leave their course because of an injury or an illness, has stayed almost the same for 28 years. And actually this year, so far, we're doing pretty good. We're below 1. And I expect that will go up, because it's only from September to December. But it gives us a long-term view of how we're doing, and that's helpful to us. And it also gives us short-term view, so we can look for blips and that kind of thing. I try to turn the data around and give it to instructors to make it accessible to them so it increases their awareness of what's happening. And it's kind of stretched. Athletic injuries is our most common injury. These are sprains and strains of knees, ankles, and lower backs. Okay, they're fairly minor stuff. Soft tissue, wounds, cuts, abrasions, contusions are the most are our soft tissue injuries, and they're fairly minor as well. So what this tells me for our instructors is these things are fairly preventable if we pay attention to them. Hike at a reasonable progression. Take these novices who've never carried a pack and start them off slow. Don't start them off with a 10-mile hike, or they're just going to come back out of the mountains. They're going to get hurt. Watch for slips, trips, and falls. The other thing it does is it tells our clientele, our parents, our students, that the things you might normally associate with being outdoors and outdoor pursuits, like fractures or cold injuries, don't happen that often at NOLS. So it gives them some context, and it gives them some perspective. It also is really useful for our insurance company. They love this kind of stuff. They think it's great. We've had some fatalities at NOLS, and we try to pay attention to these. As you can see, from 89 to 99, we had 4 fatalities. And I came into the job here. I was in the job for a month when Katie died, and Doug came down and helped us do an incident review of this, which was great. That's when I first met him. And then Thomas died 3 years later. So we had kind of a range of about every 3 to 3.5 years, we lost a student in a 10-year period. So I thought about this, and it's like, we got to stop this. This is not acceptable. And I tried to figure out, how do you do this with a culture such as NOLS and people that are spread out all over the world? And what I found was something called the Hawthorne effect. And what it is this guy named Hawthorne was some sort of social scientist back in the 1800s, and he looked at productivity in factories. And they were trying to figure out, how do we make the factory produce more widgets? What can we do to get the people to get more things done within the day? And they did all kinds of things with moving their lunch periods, moving their break periods, starting at different times, shifting their work schedules, and all this kind of thing. And they basically came to the conclusion that it didn't matter exactly what they did. The fact that they paid attention to the workers increased productivity. It made them do a better job. So I thought, okay, let's see if we can do that in the NOLS context. So this sort of chart didn't exist before, actually 2003 at NOLS. We had this history, but we would kind of put it aside and sort of tuck it away. It's like, okay, that's the bad stuff. Let's not dig that out again. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and put it out in this timeline so instructors can see this. People died on NOLS courses. That's a big deal. That sucks. We got to do what we can to prevent them from dying, but we need to achieve our educational goals at the same time. So it just really rings true to staff that the decisions that they make in the field are really important, even the little ones. Some of the littlest ones can be significant. And this has helped, and we had a great run. We went 12 years, 1.9 million program days without a fatality until September 2011, when a young man fell off a trail in India and fell to his death. And that was tragic. So it was a good run, and I think this Hawthorne effect thing worked. So something to consider. So incident reviews. we do incident reviews. So I spend a lot of my time working on our database, just maintaining it, keeping it cleaned up, and that kind of thing, so I can do my analysis 3 times a year and get some of those charts. And then periodically we'll do a deeper incident review of something that happened. We'll do one for a fatality. That's given. We will also, and I do the internal review, we will also consider an external review. That's what Doug was involved with. And that would be for a fatality or any kind of life and limb injury. We would do an incident review. If there's a lot of media attention being thrown at a particular incident, we had a bear incident a couple of years ago in Alaska where four boys were attacked by a grizzly bear and got mauled and scratched up pretty bad, and the media was relentless. It was amazing stuff. And we did a review of that, and we produced that and made it available to the media so they could see our side of the story and what happened. And then if there's some unique events where we might have some specific or unique learning. We had an incident last summer in Norway where a student was kayaking and she had a seizure, tipped over, didn't come out of her boat. The instructor, who was 30 meters ahead, got to her within a half a minute and pulled her up out of the water, saved her life. He did a terrific job. It also spoke to how we managed the pot of boats on the water, and that was like, we need to share this with everyone. He did a great job. We also had some issues with the evacuation with the helicopters and the local services, because it was our first time of doing a helicopter evac there. So we had to learn from that. So we did an incident review on that. And it wasn't a bad outcome. It was a good outcome, but we learned a lot from it. So I want to go into organizational risk management. And organizational risk management is based on the premise that people make mistakes, okay? We're all human. Humans are prone to make errors, okay? Nobody's perfect. And there's a few different schools of thought that I've used in my work to try to get me to where I am in terms of how I look at incidents and how I do the reviews. One of these is normal accident theory by Charles Perrow. And basically, Perrow says that Perrow studies really complex systems, nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, that kind of thing. And he says that complex systems are going to have accidents. It's a given. They're going to happen. And that these accidents happen from small errors. You've probably heard of the idea of a cascade of errors, sort of thing. So you have these different events that happen that one leads to another, leads to an event. And what he's done is he's kind of looked at those, and he's seen how those different events are associated with each other. And he came up with loose coupling, which is events that are fairly unrelated to each other that lead to an accident. And in a loose coupled situation, there's slack in the system. So the system itself, whether it's a machine or an aircraft carrier, might have some opportunity to intervene and stop the cascade of events and stop the error. Okay? There's some time there. And then a tight coupling is when things are very closely related. And there's little slack in that system, and so these events are going to happen pretty quickly, and they're likely to end with a catastrophic event. Okay, so he's kind of identified those, which are useful for me in what I do. He says that no matter what you do as a manager, you're going to have accidents, so just get over it and deal with it. It's kind of a real pessimistic theory, but it has a lot of merits, and it's useful. I don't have time to go into a lot of detail on it, but I've got a bibliography too at the end. The other theory that I use is high reliability theory. And this basically says the opposite, that organizational design can compensate for human error. So you can organize yourself in a way to prevent accidents and to do a better job. And high reliability organizations, HROs, have 4 things in common. And the first one is leadership safety objectives. So this is the people at the top of the organization make safety a high priority. Okay? And they don't just give it lip service, they give it resources. They spend money on it. That's why I have my job, basically. NOLS believes that this is really important. And so they put a fair amount of dollars and resources and people's time into achieving these objectives. Redundancy. HROs have redundant systems. And whether that's some sort of high-tech thing on an aircraft carrier, or the fact that at NOLS courses we always have at least 2 instructors on a course, and often more. Everyone's got their own first aid kit. They all have the same first aid training, that kind of thing. We have some redundancies built into it. And then decentralization and culture. And this means that basically the person on the assembly line can pull the plug on something. If they see something going wrong, they have the authority to stop it from happening. So in our scheme, our organizational scheme, you saw those instructors, they're charged with delivering the course and achieving the outcomes. And it's up to them to decide, well, we can't cross this slope today because the snow conditions are too unstable. So we're either going to stop or go around, which may delay us getting to another point, may have some other implications later. But they have the authority to do that. They're not set up in such a regimented situation that they're like, hell or high water, I've got to cross the slope because we've got to get to the other side because we've got to get to the roadhead. They have some flexibility there. Culture, too, I talked about more when I talked about NOLS, is that it's a culture of wanting to share information. It's wanting to help each other. It's doing the right thing when no one's looking. And then organizational learning. You learn from the mistakes of others. That's the way you improve. HROs, when I saw this stuff and I looked at it and I played it up against NOLS, I went, wow, this is great. It fits. We match with this, because I'd never heard of it until like 10 years ago. Wildland firefighters are using this now, and they're using high reliability theory in order to do a better job in managing the risks they deal with. And a lot of this is set up because the people on the front end are the ones that have to make the decisions, and they're the ones, that are kind of hanging it out there. Todd, my predecessor, said the answer is in the cockpit. We did a lot of studies, too, with crew resource management of pilots and how they interact and how they communicate. Effective ones can communicate and keep the plane in the air. Other ones miscommunicate and mess up and the plane crashes. There's some fascinating stuff in there. Crew resource management. And then the last one, systems risk management. And this is being put together by some friends of mine in Canada, Jeff Jackson and John Heshka. They're professors at different colleges up there. And they've taken a lot of what Perot has said and what the high reliability theory has to do. And there's another man named James Reason, who's a psychologist who's done a lot on organizational incidents. And they've kind of put it together to create a systems risk management program for outdoor adventure companies. And it's basically the interaction and interplay of all the different aspects of your company, your organization, are part of your risk management plan, are part of the methods in which you manage risk. And they use some of James Reason's work and look at 2 types of errors. One is active errors, and those are the people. They're on the sharp end of the rope. They're the ones in the field making decisions, looking at the environment, having to decide what to do. And then there's latent errors, and that's more the systems, behind-the-scenes part, the blunt end, the part that is not so obvious. And it really comes down to the idea that I'll say, at least in my world, the old days when there would be an accident and someone would say, heads will roll, this person should be fired because they screwed up. Okay? They put all the blame on the individual that was there at the sharp end, failing to see that there might be things that are going on in the organization that put this person in a bad spot. It's a good person that might have made a poor decision that ended up in a bad outcome. But it might be the organization that actually put him or her there. So systems risk management really helps get away from the blame game. And Jeff and John came up with this great quote. The guide may have pulled the trigger, but it's the organization that put the gun in his hand. And then James Reason, he says that to prevent these active errors, you need to go back into the organization and look at these latent failures and find those, and that'll prevent bad things from happening. So this rings really true with what I do and how I look at incidents. So I'll try to run through an incident here quickly and use some of James Reason's stuff. This is a kind of a complicated deal, but I'll explain it briefly. Basically, an instructor was rappelling and wrapped off the end of his rope. And he free fell for 7 meters, landed on the ground, got up, and walked away. He didn't get hurt. I mean, he was bruised, but he survived. I thought he was going to die. So anyway, here's what happened. I don't know if you can see that very well. Started down here. He then climbed up to the anchor. So it's about a half of a rope pitch up to the anchor. Tied himself off. And then there's 2 climbs that they were setting up as top ropes, one here and one over here. And he then wanted to haul up the second rope. So he took part of his rope, had the student belayer down here, tied the rope to it and some other gear, and he hauled that up to the top. He set up the second anchor, and it was a really very windy day. The wind was blowing this way. So he didn't want to throw the second rope down. He figured it would get all tangled up. So he coiled it up, put it on his harness, and his intention was to rappel down and play out the rope, the second rope as he went down. He also had to go over here and set up a directional anchor to keep the ropes apart. He pulled his rope, his red rope, to find the middle point to put it in for the rappel, and he threw off the second strand of it. This is the strand that he was being belayed on, so he knew that went to the ground. And he threw the second one off. The wind took it and blew it into that little alcove, and it got stuck. So he rappelled down. He was playing out the second rope. He put in the directional. He got down far enough. He got his rope unstuck from the cliff. He got down onto this pillar. This is the little pillar where he could actually just stand. Okay. Now you can see how shaky I am. Is it working? It was. Oh, I had it. Oh, you got to hold it down. This little pillar right here, you could stand on it. And he started to back off of that. And as soon as he took a couple of steps, one strand of his rope went right up through his system, right up through the anchor and down, and he fell, sliding down this part, which is kind of a ramp, hit a little bump here, and that sent him free falling. And he ended up kind of prone position, sideways like this, and hit the ground. So it's amazing he survived. So James Reason came up with this thing called the Swiss cheese model. And the slices of cheese are your defenses. Okay, the things that you put in place to prevent an accident from happening. And depending on what's going on, these defenses can get kind of moved and manipulated through organizational influences, unsafe supervision, preconditions for unsafe acts, which could lead to an unsafe act. So you have something that happens, and they're lined up in such a way that they either the defenses become absent because you didn't think of them, or maybe they weren't put into place, or they were insufficient, and you end up with an incident. So these are the failed or absent defenses that lead to the unsafe act or incident. So when I look at this climbing incident within NOLS, a couple of things pop up. So for organizational influences, well, we have kind of a pressure to promote, pressure to perform for our instructors. They need to show their competency so they get a good evaluation so they get hired again. Okay, so that's an influence. Solo instructing. We have multiple instructors on a course, but in rock climbing camps, people go out with a couple of students and climb on their own. They're by themselves. So they lose some redundancy there. They don't have someone to watch over them or to help them make decisions. Preconditions for unsafe acts. The big one here is the multitasking. This guy was doing a lot of things at one time and dealing with very windy conditions. And it's also very loose rock, crag. It's not very solid rock, so that was a factor he had to manage. And that led to the unsafe act of rappelling off the rope. So some of these, the more cultural aspects of this for us, you do have that peer pressure for performance and getting a good eval. It made me question, is our evaluation system adequate? For the solo instructing part, there's a tradition there. That's part of our culture. That's what we do on climbing camps. Another thing that we are concerned about on climbing camps is this time constraints. We don't like students just sitting around doing nothing. So we're always trying to be real efficient, getting the ropes up as fast as possible so they're active and they're busy and they're ready to go. So there might have been that. The instructor said he was not rushing, but he definitely was trying to get them up fast. Multitasking, it was a complex system, and there might be some hubris involved in this. He said that he never relies on a student to tell him that both ends of his rope are on the ground, and that he always does it himself. It's like, well, that's a trigger for me. It's like, well, why not use the student? If the student's standing down there and he's only, 30 meters away, try to figure it out. So some overconfidence. And then improper procedure. He basically lost his situational awareness. He wasn't paying attention to the other end of the rope, and he just didn't even know that it was shortened. So somehow what we figured is that when he was readjusting his red rope to find the middle point, that he just misjudged somehow and pulled up more rope on one side than he realized. And we think that some of the rope, as he did that, piled up behind the pillar so that the guy on the ground didn't see all this rope coming down and say, wait a minute, so somehow the terrain kind of messed him up. So that's an example of how these latent conditions can lead to an active failure. And it's important to go through these processes because you never think it's going to happen to you. I don't know if you can read the bottom. Terrible, you always think somehow that it can never happen to you, and the guy got crushed by a big amble. Another incident that I'll share with you, and this is a little more the common way that I write up my incident reviews. And get the facts, what happened. You can't do anything about an analysis until you know what happened, and you have to have get all the details and all the facts. Then you start thinking about what happened. So it's important to really get in there and get the objective facts. Come up with a conclusion, why it happened. Then come up with recommendations, which is basically what to change. What are you going to do differently now that this has occurred, if anything? So here's another incident that happened. This is a near miss. It happened in Alaska a few years ago during a river crossing. There's a glacier about a mile and a half upstream. So this is really cold water. It's glacial till. It's opaque. You can tell it's moving pretty fast. It was a course that was on that side of the river, wanting to get to this side of the river. And they broke into 3 groups. And they were using what we call the eddy method of crossing. And so what happens here is you have a strong person in the front who takes the brunt of the current. And then the people line up behind. And they get less and less current as it goes back. So this person back here, these two have the least force of the water on them. And you can see how the water's a little bit lower on them. This guy's 6'2". So he's pretty tall, and that water is getting close to his crotch. They stepped into a big hole and their entire formation fell apart. Kaylee went face down in the water with her backpack on her and got really scared. Ron, the instructor, he was at the front of the line. He went downstream, and Gabe went downstream. And they were okay, but Ron and Gabe lost their packs. And Kaylee got really, really scared. She was 16 years old. So when this came to me, all I could think of was what happened in 1996 when a 16-year-old girl died on a NOLS course in a river crossing. It's like, oh, God, here we go again. But she didn't die, but she was pretty shook up. This is a little bit of a map that I came up with to sort of illustrate where they went. They had kind of come across shallow water to gravel bars, and this was the main channel, and they fell apart here and went down. So the first team that went across stepped into the same hole, stepped into the deep water, and they fell apart as well, but they were a little bit further over, and they were able to get everyone to shore. They were busy emptying their boots, and there was no communication between the first team and the second team. So the second team just charges into the water, and they get partway across, and they step into this big hole, and they fell apart. The third team, over here, the spotter team, didn't really get into any kind of a spotting or assistant position until after the team fell in the water, the second team. So they really weren't in position to do anything. They kind of reacted rather than being proactive. Some other factors with this thing was it had been a few days to get to this point. They'd been hiking. They've been trying to get to this point to do a peak ascent, sort of a seminal event of the course. They've been getting stymied by having difficulty crossing other rivers. They tried different places on this one to cross this river and didn't work. They were getting fatigued. They were tired. They could see their goal just on the other side. One student started complaining about having to hike on this rough and rugged bouldery terrain. It started to rain. He was whining some more. They decided, oh, this looks good. Let's just try this. So they stopped. And the good thing they did is they stopped and made camp. They decided not to cross it right away. But they sent someone down to scout it. And the guy that they sent down to scout it was his first course as a NOLS instructor. So he had limited experience assessing river crossing sites. And the course leader, who should have the most experience, didn't get involved in the assessment at all. It was really odd to me. And the other instructor, there were 3 instructors, she didn't get involved either. So we did an analysis of this. And this is the system that I use. I look at the objective factors, the subjective factors, and the program factors. So what was the environment like? What were the people doing or thinking? And then what was going on with us as a program that might have influenced them to take certain risks? And run through this. It's fairly straightforward. Environmental factors, there was some rugged terrain, the cold, rainy weather that I mentioned was a factor in picking this spot. What it did is it detracted them from walking the extra 1.5 miles up, crossing the glacier, and walking 1.5 miles back down. They didn't want to do that extra 3 miles. There was strong current. The current was going faster than a walking pace. Walking pace is kind of our general rule of thumb of what you would, a current that you could cross, way to cross in. The depth, they didn't do an adequate job figuring out the depth of this crossing. The instructor went down there. He took a couple steps into the water. It was below his knee. And then he did this rock throwing thing where he throws rocks into the water. And if you hear the rock hit the bottom, that means it's shallow enough. If you don't hear it, that means it's too deep. I have very little faith in that system of gauging depth. I think you can get a lot of false positives. But it's kind of part of the NOLS culture. It's a hard one. Some people are adamant that it works. But anyway, they didn't know about the depth, getting deeper. And then the riverbed composition. This is an active riverbed, so there's a lot of, these boulders are moving around. The bottom of the river is changing all the time. I talked about the stress of they were being delayed getting to what they wanted to do. They had to get this peak ascent, and then they had to get to a re-ration. So those time pressures were factoring into them. We talked about the depth of the river. They did a poor job of executing the crossing. They didn't do they didn't follow our procedures for executing a crossing the way that they should have. There was some miscommunication. The teams weren't talking to each other. Nobody said, hey, wait, stop, don't come across, this is really deep. They just let them come. And the CL, the course leader, said, yeah, I disregarded my instincts because I thought I don't usually cross rivers when the current's that fast. The program factors, it was the height of summer, so we had some staff selection issues about how we picked this team. The adhering to a schedule part we talked about, trying to please others, this sort of whiny student, and disregarding expectations and practices. The other expectation in Alaska is you never have to cross a river if you don't think you can. And we would rarely use the word never at NOLS, but in this case we do. And so if you got to a spot and you couldn't cross this river, it is okay to pull out your satellite phone, call the base and say, we're stuck. And they'll send in a plane and they'll move you, or they'll figure out a way to reroute the course so you don't have to cross the river. But these guys disregarded that expectation. So conclusion, why did they do it? They were motivated to cross. They really misperceived the hazard. They didn't follow procedures. And their skills weren't really up to par. There's a lot of latent issues with this incident. So our recommendations were that we need to look at how we're hiring people for these kinds of courses. You know, what kind of criteria we're going to use to put people on in these situations. We need to improve staff's river crossing training and their ability to do these kinds of crossings. And we need to revise our practices. When I looked at the way that our practices were written, they were hard to follow. I thought I just saw lots of problems with it. So I took it apart. I totally deconstructed everything we had written about river crossings. I did research on what other people are doing and how they cross rivers. I came up with a document that represents river crossing for all of NOLS. And like one issue in particular is that in New Zealand, they use a method for crossing rivers that is very different than the way we do things in North America. I won't explain the details, but in New Zealand, if you don't use that method, you're basically not following industry standards. But for us, and for me, I looked at it and was like, this is kind of strange. I've never done this method before. And but I had to write this to include that because we cross a lot of rivers in New Zealand. So we broke it down, took it all apart. I reorganized it, rewrote it. We have a teaching section that gives objectives, how to plan for it, river crossings, the curriculum, what we're going to teach, and then how we're going to teach it. And then we revised, we have a section on river features, because there's a lot of details about river features that you need to know. You need to understand the environment. And then we have crossing methods. We broke it into dry crossings and wet crossings. And then as a way to make it simpler to try to remember everything, came up with this acronym WADE. And WADE stands for Watch, Assess, Decide, and Execute. So watch is planning. Are there rivers you're going to have to cross on your route? What time of year is it? What's the water level going to be? You know, things like that. Pre-course stuff, pre-trip things. Or watching the weather. Okay, we've had 5 days of downpour, so that's going to do something to the river levels as opposed to 5 days of hot, sunny weather. Assess. This is basically looking at the site that you want to cross, assessing whether or not it's good or appropriate for your group and your group's skill and ability. Then deciding, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to run it, this is how we're going to communicate when we do it, and then executing it, and then pulling it off. So there's a lot of little details that go into this. We came up with a little chart for students, and we came up with a checklist as well. So we've got a couple of different tools that students and instructors can use to try to remember how to deal with river crossings.
Do you guys have anything in place for an incident like that? What happens when something goes wrong? You know, like the redundancy factor. Do you have throw bags or any sort of thing where an instructor could be on the side of the river and be like, okay, if you guys go in, we're going to have some sort of redundancy act to try to keep you from running up 2 miles down the river.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's like in the the rescue side. So basically self-rescue, because the team's going to have to rescue themselves. So yeah, that's part of it, and it falls into the weight, it falls into the assessment side. You know, what can we do? How do we set the safety for this crossing in the assessment? We have accepted techniques. There's 5 weighting methods that we use we call them accepted at NOLS, and they're illustrated in the document. And these are ones that were vetted to a lot of staff. We have issues over hip belts. There's 2 schools of thought: keep the hip belt on, take the hip belt off, that kind of thing. We have parameters around how to make a decision regarding hip belts, and then the rescue. So this worked pretty well. And what made it work was we're clarifying the content and the expectations, okay? But I got input from staff. I didn't just sit in my desk and write this stuff up and dream it up, you know. I talked to a lot of our faculty, our field faculty all around the world that deal with river crossings. And I got their input, and I wrote it up. And then I had, I don't know, I must have had 7 or 8 drafts that I would vet out to faculty and say, okay, read this. Let me know what you think. So it's incorporating the staff and those people to help us collectively come up with a practice that's going to work, that they're going to buy into, and that they're going to follow, they're going to want to follow. And so, you know, our revision, I think, works quite well. And the other thing we added to it was now we have opportunities for pre-trip practice. So people go out and do a little half-day seminar on river crossings, and they actually get wet and go through the practice, go through the procedures, and figure out, oh, you know, it's much for their own awareness. Like, I might get into a water and say, oh, I'm more stable in this water than I thought I would be. That's information that I need to have. Or I might be less stable, that kind of thing. Or I've never tried this method, and I want to try it. Oh, I hate it, or I love it, you know. So it gives them time to experiment. And so it's worked pretty well. So that's kind of a quick and dirty rundown of sort of an incident that resulted in some significant change at NOLS. And so just in summary, we're large, we're pretty complex, we have a lot of risks, we got to deal with a lot of human aspects of it. We have a systems approach to risk management and a strong culture for doing a great job. We learn from our mistakes. We evaluate the people on the sharp end, we evaluate the systems on the blunt end, and we're self-critical. So, and these are the books that I've been using the last 10 or so years to try to formulate this risk plan. So, that's all I have.